When you walk away from a narcissist, it can feel confusing, painful, and even destabilizing. You may question whether leaving mattered, whether they moved on effortlessly, or whether you were ever truly significant. But here is the truth that rarely gets talked about. There are losses a narcissist sustains that time, distraction, and replacement can never repair. Your departure doesn't just end a relationship, it disrupts a carefully constructed illusion they rely on to survive. Narcissists feed on control, validation, and the emotional reactions of others. When you leave with clarity, boundaries, and self-respect, you remove more than your presence. You remove access. You remove supply. You remove the mirror that once reflected back the version of themselves they needed to believe in. And that absence creates a quiet but permanent fracture. This is not about revenge or watching them suffer. This is about understanding your power so you stop minimizing your impact. Healing begins when you realize that walking away wasn't weakness. It was strength. And some losses don't announce themselves loudly, they echo forever in the silence you leave behind. One of the most destabilizing experiences for a narcissist is the loss of control, because control is the foundation of their sense of power. In your life, this control may have shown up subtly at first, through emotional manipulation, shifting goalposts, silent treatments, or the constant need to dictate how you felt, thought, or responded. Over time, you may have adjusted yourself to keep the peace, slowly surrendering your autonomy in ways you didn't even recognize. But the moment you chose to leave, something fundamental broke. Your absence removes their ability to regulate their self-worth through you. Narcissists depend on external validation to feel stable, and control over others gives them the illusion of strength. When you step away, especially without explanation or emotional engagement, their carefully managed narrative collapses. They can no longer predict your reactions, influence your emotions, or use you as a source of reassurance. This is not a temporary inconvenience for them. It is a deep psychological injury to the false self they have spent a lifetime protecting. In your own life, reclaiming control means reclaiming your inner authority. When you stop responding to provocation, stop trying to be understood, and stop offering emotional access, you disrupt the dynamic entirely. The narcissist's power was never real. It was borrowed from your empathy, your patience, and your willingness to engage. Your withdrawal exposes that truth. Without your participation, their dominance has nowhere to land. This loss of control often triggers frantic attempts to reassert power. They may try charm, guilt, anger, or public narratives designed to pull you back into the orbit. But each failed attempt reinforces the same painful realization: you are no longer accessible. And that realization is devastating because it confronts them with something they cannot manipulate: your autonomy. For you, this moment is transformative. You begin to understand that strength is not loud or aggressive. True power is the ability to choose distance, to remain steady in the face of provocation, and to prioritize your well-being over someone else's chaos. As you rebuild your sense of self, you no longer measure your worth through their reactions or approval. You begin to trust your own clarity, your boundaries, and your capacity to stand alone. What the narcissist never recovers from is not the loss of you as a person, but the loss of the control they once believed they had over your inner world. Your absence shatters the illusion that they were powerful. It proves that their influence was conditional, not absolute. And once that illusion breaks, it cannot be repaired, because the truth has been revealed, and you have stepped fully back into yourself. Narcissists survive by wearing a mask, a carefully constructed image designed to secure admiration, control, and emotional supply. In your life, this mask may have appeared as charm, confidence, intensity, or even vulnerability. It drew you in because it mirrored what you valued: connection, depth, loyalty, or understanding. But that mask was never sustainable on its own. It required an audience, and more importantly, it required someone who believed in it. When you leave, the mask doesn't just slip, it collapses. You were not interchangeable. You didn't simply play a role, you reinforced their illusion. Through your empathy and emotional investment, you helped stabilize a version of themselves they desperately needed to maintain. You saw them at their best and their worst, and despite the confusion and pain, you offered consistency. That consistency is rare. When you remove it, they are forced to confront a hollow space where validation once lived. They may appear to move on quickly, surrounding themselves with new people, new attention, or new admiration. But replacement is not recovery. New supply can mirror the surface, but it cannot replicate the depth of emotional imprint you left behind. You understood their patterns, their vulnerabilities, and their contradictions. That level of attunement cannot be easily recreated because it requires time, access, and emotional labor. And most importantly, it requires authenticity, something they struggle to sustain. As the mask collapses, cracks begin to show in how they relate to others. Without your stabilizing presence, their behavior becomes more obvious, more erratic, and less contained. The charm feels rehearsed, the narratives feel thin, and the contradictions become harder to hide. Even if others don't immediately see it, the narcissist feels it. They know the performance is weaker. They know something essential is missing. In your own life, the realization can be profoundly healing. You begin to understand that your value was never tied to being chosen or replaced. Your impact came from your emotional truth, your depth, and your capacity to connect in ways that were real. The fact that they cannot replace you is not about ego, it is about authenticity. You brought something genuine into a dynamic built on illusion. Leaving means you stop participating in the performance. You no longer help hold the mask in place. And once that support is gone, the collapse is inevitable. They may try to recreate the past, rewrite the story, or convince themselves that you were easily substituted. But deep down, they know the difference between distraction and connection. What they never recover from is the loss of someone who saw beyond the mask and still chose themselves. Because when the mask collapses, it exposes the truth they spend their lives running from. And that truth is that real connection cannot be faked, borrowed, or replaced once it has been lost. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood as indifference or coldness, but in reality, it is one of the most powerful acts of self-preservation you can practice after leaving a narcissist. In your life, detachment does not mean you never cared. It means you cared enough to stop allowing your emotions to be used against you. Narcissists rely on emotional access to maintain control. They provoke reactions, mine vulnerability, and rewrite narratives based on how you respond. When that access disappears, their entire system of manipulation begins to fail. While you were connected, your feelings were data points. Your pain reassured them of importance. Your explanations, gave them leverage. Your empathy gave them permission to avoid accountability. Emotional engagement kept the cycle alive. But when you detach, you remove the raw material they need to distort reality. They can no longer bait you into defending yourself or pull you into circular conversations designed to exhaust and confuse you. Silence, neutrality, and consistency become boundaries they cannot penetrate. What makes emotional detachment so destabilizing is that it cannot be argued with or reframed. A narcissist can rewrite events, deny behavior, and project blame, but they cannot manipulate an absence of reaction. They can tell stories about you, but they cannot access you. And without that access, their version of reality loses power. The emotional pull they once depended on no longer works, and this creates a deep sense of helplessness for someone who thrives on influence. In your own healing, detachment is not about shutting down your heart. It is about redirecting your emotional energy back to yourself. You stop waiting for closure from someone incapable of giving it. You stop hoping for understanding from someone invested in misunderstanding. You begin to recognize that peace comes not from being validated by them, but from validating your own experience. This shift changes how you see yourself. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth, explain your pain, or correct their lies. You understand that your truth does not require their agreement. Emotional detachment allows you to reclaim your internal stability. You become less reactive, more grounded, and clearer about what you will and will not tolerate. For the narcissist, this is an irreversible loss. I attempt to provoke you with kindness, cruelty, or nostalgia, but none of it lands the same way. The hooks no longer catch. The buttons no longer work. And that is terrifying for someone whose sense of power depended on your emotional responsiveness. What they never recover from is realizing that they no longer matter in the way they once did. Not because you are bitter, but because you are free. Your emotional detachment is not a punishment. It is a declaration that your inner world is no longer available for manipulation, distortion, or control, and once that door closes, it does not reopen. When you leave a narcissist and no longer engage, something begins that you will likely never witness directly, a silent reckoning. It is not dramatic, public, or immediate. It unfolds internally, in the spaces where distraction fades and performance no longer works. In your life, this reckoning is not about them suddenly becoming self-aware or taking responsibility. It is about being forced to live with a truth they can no longer outrun. Narcissists spend their lives externalizing discomfort. They project blame, rewrite history, and surround themselves with people who help them avoid their inner emptiness. As long as someone is available to absorb their chaos, they can maintain the illusion that they are untouched and superior. Your departure removes a critical buffer. Without your presence, the familiar escape route closes, and the discomfort has nowhere to go but inward. This is where the reckoning lives. It shows up in moments of quiet, in the instability of their relationships, and in the growing awareness that something keeps going wrong. They may never articulate it, but the pattern becomes undeniable. People leave, conflicts repeat. The same endings happen again and again, and beneath all the defenses, there is an unspoken recognition that you were not the problem they claimed you were. In your own journey, understanding this can be deeply grounding. You stop needing visible remorse or an apology that will never come. You realize that accountability does not always look like regret expressed out loud. Sometimes it looks like repetition without resolution. Sometimes it looks like an inability to sustain intimacy. Sometimes it looks like a life filled with noise that never quite quiets the inner unrest. Your healing does not require their awakening. It requires your acceptance that their struggle is ongoing, internal, and inescapable. While you are rebuilding, growing, and forming healthier connections, they are managing the same unresolved conflicts in different forms. This is not justice in a cinematic sense, but it is reality. The truth they cannot escape is that control does not equal connection, admiration does not equal love, and power does not equal peace. No amount of external success or attention can compensate for the absence of genuine self-connection. And once you step away, that absence becomes harder to ignore. What makes this reckoning permanent is that it follows them everywhere. It is not tied to you anymore. It is embedded in their patterns, their relationships, and their inability to feel satisfied. You leaving did not cause this truth, but it removed the distraction that allowed them to deny it. In your life, this understanding allows you to let go of the fantasy that they will one day see you, understand you, or are transformed. You no longer need that outcome. Your closure comes from knowing that walking away aligned you with truth, stability, and self-respect. Their reckoning happens in silence, but your growth happens in the open. And that is the difference that matters. Walking away from a narcissist is not the end of your story, it is the moment your story finally becomes yours. What they never recover from is not a single action or confrontation, but the permanent shift that occurs when you choose yourself. Your absence removes their illusion of control, exposes the fragility of the mask they depended on, and closes the door to emotional access they once exploited. These losses are quiet, but they are lasting. For you, the ending is not about proving anything or waiting for validation. It is about reclaiming your time, your energy, and your sense of self. You begin to recognize how much strength it took to leave a dynamic that thrived on confusion and self-doubt. You learn that peace feels unfamiliar at first, but it is far more stable than chaos disguised as passion. As you move forward, your life becomes less about reaction and more about intention. You trust your perceptions. You honor your boundaries. You stop shrinking to accommodate someone else's dysfunction. And in that space, something powerful happens. You heal. They may continue repeating the same cycles, but you no longer participate. Your freedom is not loud or vengeful. It is steady, grounded, and deeply earned. And that is the truth that matters most. You did not lose anything by leaving. You gained yourself, and that is something no one can ever take from you.